Okay, I think we can start. Uh, Hello and welcome. I'm your host and moderator, Manpreet Dash. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. The topic for today's webinar is Cybersecurity for AI in Digital Health. Over the next decade, AI will transform digital health. AI algorithms empower healthcare in developing new drugs, interpreting medical images, cleaning up electronic patient charts, and in transforming radiology, retinopathy, and high performance medicine. In this webinar, you will learn about novel cybersecurity threats impacting these AI systems' integrity and patient safety, and the why and how of protecting your AI assets against these risks. And to make sure we are helping you as best as we can, we have a chat box to source your questions. Feel free to drop questions or share your experience and thoughts on this topic. We will answer your questions after the session. So, without much further ado, let me introduce you to our speakers for today. Manoj Kumar Parmar is the founder, CEO, and CTO of Bosch AIShield, a startup at Bosch, which is on a mission to secure AI systems of the world. Manoj is an award-winning and prolific inventor with 25 plus patents and 13 papers. He is a recipient of Chevening Cybersecurity Fellowship 2021 by the UK government's FCD office. 𝐏𝐿 awarded him Technology Role Model Award in 2020. He is a founding member of MITRE Atlas. He is a lifelong learner and enjoys cooking, reading, and jogging. John Giansidis is the president of CyberActa. He advises clients on matters spanning the product lifecycle from product development and clinical trials to commercialization and post-market vigilance. With deep regulatory, technology, and legal background, and a sharp focus on tackling emerging cybersecurity and privacy risks, John provides strategic yet pragmatic perspectives on addressing critical risks in a business-focused and impactful manner. Now moving on to the outline of this session. John will be talking about digital health and increasing AI adoption, and then cover the broad cybersecurity expectations of digital health from a regulatory standpoint. He will then shed some light on recent developments from the FDA for AI-enabled digital health. Manoj will be taking up emerging cybersecurity threats, particularly relevant to AI-based digital health and their potential impacts on patient safety. Ultimately, as a practitioner, he will covering with use cases how AI security can enhance patient safety and enable better business outcomes for digital health companies. So let's find out and get started. Handing it over to John.
Awesome. Thank you, Manpreet. You're going to want to go to the next slide. And really, as we're getting started, from a digital health standpoint, this encompasses for us in the industry, whether it's going to be digital health, medical devices, precision medicine, or really the discovery aspect is a lot of it has over the past probably about 10 years, we have this massive revolution in terms of the adoption of technologies on how do we bring about prognosis, working with our clinicians in diagnosis and anything related to the clinical workflows. And one of the key subset that we have seen in terms of being developed is not only software as a medical device, but really software as a medical device that it's enabled by either AI or machine learning models. And that is really just taken off. And you can see that with FDA clearances, that how that is bringing about really the change when it comes to radiology, pathology, and other aspects of what is taking place. And it's something that will obviously continue to grow. And what we want to do is really just have better outcomes for our patients and our users. That's really what it boils down to. While we're be more effective, more efficient in terms of our clinical decision making, and really allow the accessibility of that digital health in other areas, and obviously the business efficiency that may exist within digital AI. But this is really kind of this transformation has been going on, and obviously will accelerate even more. Next slide, please. And I just listed some of the areas that we have seen, and you can go through with the FDA and other regulatory agencies in terms of what it's available in terms of the marketplace, either as a clear device or under the ONC as a CDS tool, a clinical disease support tool, or other categorization. But it really kind of goes the whole spectrum of disease state, from identifying a disease state or diagnosis all the way out to management of that care, and really facilitating that information. And we've seen all different aspects of how that AI is being deployed. As more data sets become available, then there's a continuous feedback loop in developing those activities. Next slide, please. Manpreet Moore, I cannot see the slides. So
Wait,
what?
let me just try.
Thank you.
Should I try again? Let me just try to share it again.
Thank you, sir.
Can you see it right now, John?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So in terms of we talk about kind of the baseline of this digital evolution, especially in our healthcare life sciences, and there's the flip side of this one is really, this is kind of where the crux of the matter boils down for this webinar, and really kind of what we're trying to get across is that digital health is prone to cyber threats and actors from either states or other elements, and the reason is obviously there's a monetary benefit for those individuals or organizations, and having access to that patient information, it would be very valuable from a hacker or somebody trying to get that information available. And really what we have seen is that data being leaked or breached through different organizations. Obviously there's privacy concerns, but for this element is really more the education that, and we have seen that, and Manoj will speak to it, is that the possibility or probability that we will have patient harm through misdiagnosis, and that is going to be something that's going to be very important for medical device manufacturers or physicians or healthcare professionals dealing with that tool, and that erodes the confidence that it would have in utilization of that particular aspect. And then obviously anything that comes with electronic interoperability is important, both for the hospitals and the healthcare professionals. And on the traditional aspect, you're still dealing with the potential impact of recalls that have to be considered if that particular SAMD or anything related to an AI-enabled framework is subject to a cyber attack. So that's something that we need to consider as we go forward in our development. Next slide, please. So, and I tried to really reduce down, and these couple of slides will really kind of have the aspect of one from a security standpoint and one from a AI-enabled medical devices. So as of right now, irrespective of where you commercialize, whether it's going to be the FDA in Europe, is the expectations can be boiled down to 5 areas from a cybersecurity standpoint. Is that your design has to be securely designed. Security by design is implemented. There's the security documentation is available to the users or patients, and you have a robust cybersecurity risk management program that identifies those elements. There is a formal and robust validation and verification set of activities as it pertains to that cybersecurity. And last but not least is really about the surveillance and detection of those threats. So this is really kind of the baseline expectation when it comes to anything that has, if I were to use the term, if it has a code, that will be the expectations if you're to facilitate a submission for clearance. Next slide, please. Now, on the other side is when somebody or an organization is trying to secure, and this can be an SAMD, can be a standalone medical device, can be something that, at least in the US, a CDS tool, a clinical decision support tool, that really what it will hinge upon is really for, at least in our experience, preparing submissions for clients and working with the FDA and other agencies is really will depend upon 4 areas, and it's really about the data sets that you have, what's the inputs and the outputs based on that information, the AI or machine learning model itself, how you selected it, how you evaluated, what is the performance of that model, and obviously the clinical evaluation. And the last but not least is what we're seeing is that intended deployment, and how exactly is that model will be deployed within either, let's say, the clinical workflow or as a standalone medical device. And that is the kind of the linchpin of that aspect. So if you take it in summation is what will be necessary, and Manoj will go into much more detail, is on the potential threats that may exist or they do exist as relates to AI security for those models, and how imperative it is to have a game plan to addressing it. Next slide, please. And that is really the aspect of what we're seeing both within the U.S. regulatory framework and overseas, is that to really bring about that protection of SAMDs with an AI or machine learning component and really protect the safety of those patients is really a manufacturer would have to assess whether or not there's a risk to harm to the patient by those hazards. And those hazards have to include the any adversarial AI threats that may exist, and they may have an impact on the performance, the quality, and really anything, the rendering of the SAMD as itself. And what we've seen, and Manoj will go into more detail here, is that those models are susceptible to what AIShield deems as novel threats, and those are those adversarial AI threats that can manipulate the data, can retrain the models, really embed features or outcomes within the model itself that will have an impact to that information. But I would like to transition over to Manoj to really dive into so those big 4 categories that, and I want you to go back and compare the slide in terms of a clearance and the models, that there's a direct connection between data poisoning, the modal evasion or model extraction that may exist as you're planning on commercializing that deployment. So Manoj.
Thank you, John. That was a wonderful discussion. And Manpreet, thanks for hosting us today. My name is Manoj, and I'm going to walk you through the AI security, which is essentially a deep dive onto the novel adversarial AI threats. Now, John mentioned about those threats, which are also mentioned at the bottom with respect to data poisoning, model evasion, extraction, and inference. But these are some of the very interesting and the newer dimensions. Let me start with data poisoning. Is that your AI models are learning the patterns which are there in the data. And what if an attacker can poison a set of data which is specific that they only know? So when you train in a model, this poisoning patterns will also be picked up by your model. And then this becomes a backdoor when it is deployed. And the attacker can systematically create negative outcomes or unintended outcomes from your model. This is like literally a backdoor. The another one is the model evasion, which is like evading the model to do the wrong things. Now, the AI models are essentially a boundary learning or decision-making machines. And how closer the input is to the boundary makes it all the difference. In some cases, an attacker can systematically introduce a small amount of a noise that can have a different kind of an outcome from the AI model. We will talk about this. One of the simple thing is that later on when we see is that the COVID detection and no detection case, where how the evasion really works as well. The third one is the model extraction, which is mainly that you have trained your model with tons of data which you have sourced ethically, cleaned it, figured out which algorithm works. You have done the clinical validation, and then you are commercializing. Now, attacker can extract this particular models also, and that means you will have an IP loss. And it doesn't stop there. This extracted model creates a kind of a controlled setting for attacker to really systematically launch the other attacks of poisoning, evasion, and inference. So this IP which gets stolen also gets weaponized. And the last one was essentially about the inference, where if you have trained your model with some amount of private data, the adversaries can utilize the partial inputs and rely on model in order to fulfill the other information and therefore expose the private and sensitive data. Now, these are the kind of four broad categories, and you might be wondering that what really happens with them. And before I give you the answer, we have a very quick poll question for all of you, which is, in your opinion, how often organizations suffer such kind of AI attacks? And I would really like to get your opinion here, that what do you think about it? The poll should be reflecting on your screens. In a minute. Yes, and it's very simple. How often do organizations suffer AI attacks? Very often, rare, never. We can wait here for the next 15 seconds to collect everyone's input and see that how people perceive that well these attacks are really happening and are the organizations really suffering from it. I encourage our participants to provide your valuable opinion here. Wow, we have 30 responses and now 32 and going for the often. It looks like that many of you believe that this kind of AI attacks are often. And well, this is actually a good news for this enlightened and informed community that these attacks are really happening. And what I really love here is the kind of an awareness demonstrated by almost 60 plus another 20, 80% of the people that these attacks are happening. And let me tell you the reality now. Manpreet, can you just go to the next slide? Now, Gartner ran a very extensive survey recently, and the question which was asked that how common are AI attacks? And 2 in 5 persons had an AI privacy breach or security incident as such. Now, this is like very often. But the caveat here is that 2 in the 5 organizations knew that they were attacked. There are many more. They didn't know that they were attacked as such. So 41% organization experienced an AI attack. Within that, 60% faced the data compromised by the internal parties. This also alludes to the supply chain risk in terms of how you source the model, how you source your data, and how you send it for your clinical trials and all of those particular things. And 27% had the malicious attacks on organizations' AISA. Now, the whole idea here is that, as many of you have told, that it is very often, in reality, they are happening. And as an organization, it is better that these risks are really managed, not only from the compliance point of view, but also for the better business outcomes, and also for a long term business gains. Next slide, please, Manpreet. Now, since we understood about the AI attacks, John also talked about the cybersecurity and safety of the patient is on everybody's mind here, as it should be. Now we have seen that in the past that there are cybersecurity and a safety were tightly linked, and there are certain cybersecurity incidents which have resulted into the safety thing, and that was the primary focus on many of designing the cybersecurity controls, and then the other cybersecurity controls also needed over a period of time. Now with an AI, introduction of AI, we are introducing this third circle where the novel AI attacks are happening. And because of this third circle which is introduced, we now have the four different kind of intersection. The intersection one, which is cybersecurity and safety. Traditional cybersecurity coverage was always covering it, and that is good because it had a safety impact. But now with an AI thing, we also see that the AI can also have a safety impact, and your traditional cybersecurity coverage is not covering it. Then at the confluence of cybersecurity, safety, and novel AI attack, there exists specific patterns that your traditional cybersecurity partially covering if it is done really well. And the fourth one is certain attacks which are at the intersection of the cybersecurity and AI, which doesn't have a safety impact and pretty much that the cybersecurity is not covering. Now, what I want to hint here very simply is that AISAMD providers need to understand this entire intersection and prioritize activities based on the interplay. And at the end, it is only going to be more and more complex. Let me give you the example that how this three circle interplay happens with various case studies. This is one of the case study which is there with respect to can AI attack lead to patient safety risk. Here is the very simple, the COVID-19 X-ray classification AI, which was developed, and it was fed with one of the input which you can see, and the AI model was saying that it is no COVID. Attacker was able to introduce a very small perturbation, which visually you cannot even figure it out, but can flip the outcome of the AI model from no COVID to the COVID detected. Albeit this is a misclassification, but it is not so severe because you might have other controls which are in place which can evaluate whether you have a COVID or not. But imagine the case when you have a COVID and the chest X-ray tells that there is no COVID. It really has a significant impact on the various patients. And such manipulation can affect the clinical outcomes and patient safety. And the key question is that can you detect these attacks which are happening at the intersection of AI and safety, as shown in the topmost corner. Now let me go to the next example, which is more or less model extraction, which is the different kind of an attack. Now this doesn't have a safety impact, but it has a business impact. Here is the case study about the cancerous cell detection using the AI model. Now, the organization has developed this entire model over 6 months with a 5 million euro spent overall, and validation and everything has happened. Now, attackers were able to steal this entire model in less than 2 hours at fraction of cost. And the accuracy difference between the original model and the stolen model was only 8%. That means it is literally usable. And you can see visually the output difference between the image 3 and 4. They look pretty much the same. And this AI attacks are fundamentally different from the traditional cybersecurity attacks that can compromise your IP. And not only compromise your IP, once you have your entire model, you can launch a various kinds of an attack. And that means your traditional cybersecurity controls will prove totally ineffective against them. So this is the another, only the AI attack, which is not at the confluence of cybersecurity or safety. This also needs to be validated as such. Next slide, please. Here I talk about 5 more examples. The first one is the misdiagnosis, which is the false positives, the healthy people wrongly diagnosed. The impact is there on the patient, and these are kind of a poisoning or evasion attacks, which happens at an intersection of AI and safety, more or less like how we have seen in the case of COVID X-ray previously. Then there are false negatives. Again, this can happen at the poisoning where the data set is poisoned, and in the specific case, the model starts misdiagnosing. And this happens at the intersection of the AI, cybersecurity, and safety. Similarly, imprecise diagnostics, which is poisoning, and the misuse of AI tools, which is an evasion, which is the second last. And the last one is the privacy and security concerns. The last one is a very different kind of an attack, which doesn't have an impact on the safety of a patient, but it seriously compromises the privacy of the patients. And now with this as a set of examples and confluence, what I want all of you to take back is very simple thing that these are the novel attacks which are at the confluence of an AI, cybersecurity, and safety, which are coming up. And during the development, deployment, and various other phases, you need to be fully aware about it as such. Next slide, please. John, I would like to invite you to cover the regulatory aspect of this AI security as well.
So you have me to do the fun stuff. Okay, I got it. And again, I think kind of what Manoj kind of spoke about is some of the areas where that really it's imperative to understand kind of what can happen, what can go wrong, and actually in all reality, what has gone wrong already. I think what we've seen, kind of the work that we have done with AIShield is in the past, that's fairly evident, and trying to assist our clients in better positioning that with both the regulators, their customers, and ultimately their patients and users. And we get this question a lot in terms of whether the FDA is aware of these risks, or any regulatory body. And what I'll ask is unequivocally yes. The FDA has gone on a hiring spree on bringing really not only artificial intelligence and machine learning experts, but really positioning the U.S. to be kind of the leader when it comes to AI, not necessarily in healthcare, but really in a broader sense. And you can see that is that the FDA has positioning that with the proposed regulatory framework, what is considering really the change of how SAMDs will be developed or what the expectations are. There's a corresponding action plan that has been put together. Both CyberActa and AIShield work on the draft guidance in terms of cybersecurity for medical devices. And actually, there's a two-prong approach that the FDA is taking, both with the guidance and really with the PATCH Act. That has, for the first time, bipartisan support in Congress that will really mandate the cybersecurity across the framework. Because in reality, folks are tired of not having a robust framework of execution. But it's not just the FDA. This is where I want to make sure that folks understand it. It's not just the FDA that has an interest in this aspect of security. Is really the FTC when it comes to digital health, anything that related to non-FDA governed, that will be overseen by the Federal Trade Commission. Obviously, you have the ONC, which is the Office of National Coordination for Healthcare Information Technology, that is interested, and that's one of the areas that will be looked at from a certification standpoint. And then last but not least, at least within the U.S. And HIPAA, it's OCR. So that's something. There's a regulatory effort from multiple agencies, and part of it is to really understand and really position how do we best design our products, our solutions, our services to make sure that those threats never materialize. Next slide, please. And that was, we took that screenshot and said, we have been working with AIShield for a while now, really working on an interaction that we had with the FDA in terms of, are you expecting to evaluate or test or ask for this information under the new guidance that's in place, still draft, but should be finalized before the end of the year, for anything that contains an AI or machine learning component. And the answer was yes. I mean, it was yes in writing, it was yes verbally, and really is that aspect that if you're planning on commercializing, you're planning on designing a medical device or anything that will have code that may or may not use either a front end or back end AI or machine learning element, AI security will be evaluated. So, and obviously, it's not going to be just the FDA. It's going to be for other agencies as well. And we've talked with notified bodies as well of like how do we best train them? What are the questions to ask in terms of how do you evaluate that that security? Because is different. It's different from the traditional, and I hate to use the term traditional, but that's really kind of what we're dealing with. It's the novel versus the something has been put in place from a security, information security, now transitioning over to AI security. So this is something that it's important to understand that those questions will be coming, and really just how are the steps that we need to bring into proactively. This is kind of a key point of ours, and I know AIShields as well is proactively enable our clients to make sure that they're ready to address the regulatory issues, but obviously from a business standpoint, being able to support their commercial deployment. Next slide, please. And this is, something that we do, and I'm trying to have it in our standard commercialization framework when it comes to medical devices. So really anything that would have an approval step when it comes to regulatory authority is from an SAMD is really, it's just kind of a standard process. And then you include in those steps to really embrace and build that security by design. How do you plan it? How do you implement it? And how do you maintain it? And really for the elements, for the organizations that are planning, and there's a lot of them. There's a lot of them that they want to leverage the data sets that they have. They want to leverage the data science that they have behind it. Have you adopted AI security to go along with traditional cyber? And again, traditional cyber is not going away. I'm not saying that's not the aspect. It's an add-on that will encapsulate all the other elements, because in reality, traditional cyber will not be able to address some of the threats that are coming in. And going back to the very essence of a machine learning or an AI enabled digital health solution is the possibility or probability that either the model gets impacted, or it's going to be something that the data set itself may be altered. And for our clients, what it comes down to is that each one of those events is with a new guidance that will require evaluation as a complaint. Potentially that may be a reportable event, and obviously potentially if it's really it's that intersection that Manoj eloquently described, that will be necessitate either a field action or a recall. So, and obviously you have recall that corresponds to erosion of customer confidence. So that's kind of what the interplay of this position is that how do you establish a way that the product is robust, the product is usable, and there is a market confidence in what we actually sell. Next slide, please. And the best person for this one is to guide this readiness or evaluation process is Manoj, and he'll go through and really just give you some of the pointers of like what do you need to evaluate, because it's not going to be solved overnight. But that's something holistically, if you were to take back home and say, do I have any of these? So with that being said, Manoj, if you want to take it over from here.
Thanks, John. Again, you have to do a very complex stuff, I know, and I get to do the fun stuff. So this is the simple 4-question framework that we have developed to ask all of our clients. And this, at the core, is very simple question: that AI cybersecurity attacks are easier but detection is extremely difficult. So throughout your design process, your approval process, development process, and later on the post-surveillance, across these 4 phases, we have these different questions that we ask. These are really the top level questions. First one, are you prepared to manage newer regulatory requirements in pre-market and post-market activity? The second, do you have a way to detect AI attacks and act upon them? Third, will you be able to alert relevant constituents when such an attack happens? And the fourth, could you demonstrate preventive measures and reasonable assurance against those attacks? Now, these 4 questions looks very, very simple, but it is very difficult in terms of answering, because if you look at it, it goes down all the way from your development process to your regulatory compliance process, and when the products are there into the market and users' hand, and how do you, ensure that the AI ML related products remains the safe, secure, and usable to the hands of the end user as such. Now, there is a very interesting question that we have for all of our participants. In your opinion, are you prepared to tackle the AI attacks? And this is again, I request all of our participants to provide their valuable inputs for this question, because this essentially tells about the overall readiness of all of us as in a medical industry professionals as such, that what really matters. I believe the poll is there. Up. We have 20 responses, and 55% says no, which is quite expected because it's a newer thing. 28% are not so sure, says maybe, and we have the elites among us, 15%, who believe that yes, they are prepared for the AI attacks. And I hope they are not our clients. Because we have no way to know that who has answered yes, no, or maybe. We only know the aggregated things. So let's just give us another couple of the seconds, because we already have 27 things. But majority of 85% of you who responded believe that we are not there. We are not fully prepared to tackle the AI attack. And this assessment is not so different from our understanding from our field as well. Next slide, please. So let me just introduce this particular novel solution, which is the AIShield, which is designed to provide the AI security for healthcare AI applications. Traditionally, your AI development life cycles are considered insecure from the AI threat perspectives, be it preparation of the data where the poisoning can happen, or when the models are deployed, the extraction, evasion, or inference can happen. The AIShield solutions takes your AI from unsecure to secure. And this is the core proposition of our solutions that we have learned with our customers. Next slide, please. Here is the case in point for AI ML SMD provider, which is the COVID detections from the X-ray. What AIShield does during the starting phase is helps you to clearly identify the various risks, and therefore you can choose the appropriate data cleaning techniques, the different kind of models, and your validation strategies to ascertain that the models are already hardened. However, this hardened model, you still need to understand that what are the risks that they carry. So what we do in this final phase, when your models are ready, we have this very simple methodology, which is implemented by our product and solutions, where we subject your AI and ML models to various attack vectors, techniques, and strategies. We also provide the quantified attack success rates and impact on the original AI model. In certain cases, if the attacks are highly successful and the models are found very weak against this particular attacks, we also build a defense mechanism against this successful attacks. and we provide the attack success rate and impact on the shielded AI model, which essentially means your original AI model along with our defense agent running together, how successful it is to detect this particular attack as such and prevent them. And finally, we also provide the efficacy of our defense model, that how good this defense model is. Here you can just see the example and the sample slide from the visual report, which was for the COVID related case study, which was there. You see without the AI shield on the left hand side within the red block as such, there were various attacks which were there, which was detected as a COVID, no finding and things like this. And this is just for the, for the illustration purposes. There are tons of attack vectors which actually runs behind in order to determine this aspect. And then with AIShield, we were, you see what is there in the blue box, we were able to detect this and defend against them. And what we also give as a kind of a quantified report with the key metrics of accuracy, along with a lot more other metrics to ascertain your risk, ascertain the accuracy, and ascertain the efficacy of the AI model. Here you can already see that the original model was running at 85%, along with shielded model also, the accuracy did not change, it still remained at 85. And the defense model, which was deployed along with your shielded AI model, was able to detect 90% of the attacks as such. So impact analysis is that there is a significant risk reduction achieved without compromising accuracy. And this is what we bring to the table, which is the quantified approach towards pre-market risk management, starting from your regulatory strategy, before you begin the development, during your development phase, and at the end when your models are ready and you are ready for the submission, we help you to provide this quantified results, which helps you to also give a reasonable assurance to the regulatory agencies as well as to your patients and everyone. So in essence, AIShield takes your AI from unsecure to secure as such. Next slide, please. I would like to conclude this particular seminar with this last two slides. Here are the key benefits that your organization can get working with Bosch AIShield and CyberActa. The first is that it can bring the trustworthy and secure AI adoption that essential for the security by design, inherent hardening. You have the brand and IP protection as such, because these attacks are prevented, your brand is not eroded, your IPs are preserved. The third is that it enables the regulatory compliance in a faster way. And not only that, it also provides the protection in real time in the post vigilance as such. And ultimately, the fifth one, it preserves your global competitive advantage of AI, because ultimately AI is your business and AI is what is earning the money and providing the clinical outcomes to the patients and the users as such. Next slide, please. In summary, I would like all of you to at least take back these 3 points with all of you, that AI attacks are pervasive in healthcare, and majority of you have already hinted into the poll that yes, that is in reality. But traditional cybersecurity controls cannot detect or prevent them because they are the novel ways. The second one is FDA, and likewise the other agencies are aware about the risk of emerging from the AI attacks as such, and they are mandating the security compliance around it. And the last one, the AIShield can ensure the patient safety and compliance. It can mitigate the AI risk, ensure patient safety, and manage regulatory compliance. And AI, as we have told, it is your business, but AI is a business for the patients as well. And therefore, protect your AI that protects the patients and grows your business. Thank you for wonderful audience for your attention so far. And now we are open for questions that you may have.
I would request the audience to kindly use the raise hand function, and then we will try to bring you in so that you can ask your question directly to John and Manoj. In the meanwhile, we can also take a look at a few questions from the chat.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay.
Okay, one of the question from the audience is how to defend your AI/ML service when installed on client's information system.
Understood. So I would provide an answer for this, but I will make a certain assumption so that the answer is pretty clear. In this particular case, I am assuming the question is more related that as a third party, I have developed my AI and ML model, and my clients, which is the hospital network or someone, is asking me to deploy this particular model in their network. Now, in that particular case, there are three things that you need to understand. First is that you need to deploy your model, which is essentially the business that you are in. So therefore, you cannot say no. But at that point of time, the extraction, that means your IP need to be protected, and that means you need to be aware about shielding your models against this extraction attacks. The second thing is that you will have the liability claims in case of your AI is failing. So you will need a mechanism to ascertain that your AI models were not subjected to the evasion attack when you have deployed them in your environment, which is the second one. And the third is that in some cases you might consider that the environment of deployment itself as a hostile. In these cases, you might need to be aware about poisoning of your model actively, or let's say intentionally or unintentionally, and you will need to have a mechanism to ascertain in a provenance that the change were not so, let's say, so the changes where the unintentional, it was not authorized, so the integrity aspects are considered. Now, someone has also asked the question regarding that. I think the Robert has asked the question about the hash related things. Would the cryptographic things will not solve the problem? Yes, the cryptographic can solve the problem only if your model is deployed, and it can only give you the assurance that nobody has changed it. But what it cannot give the assurance that if your model was poisoned because of the data, or your model is extracted, or your model is evaded. This is where the traditional cryptographic digest and other things or signature-based mechanisms will not be able to work, because the AI attacks happens via data as well.
Great.
I hope that answers the questions. Two questions together.
Okay, Manoj, we have a lot more questions. I think this is a question coming from Javier, who works at a stealth initiative in diagnosis as a service. His question is, why should I consider AI security above what my existing accelerator program guides me to? And is it not bound to be covered by the current cybersecurity measures?
That's an excellent question. I would invite John first to answer that part, that why the cybersecurity, traditional cybersecurity will not be enough, because that is more of a regulatory aspect.
Yeah.
And then I
no, that's fair. And I think the caveat is very simple. The thing is, the part of it is the dynamic aspect of an AI and machine learning deployment, whether it's going to be an SAMD and there's two elements that will be subject to. One is the data itself, and the other is the model. So there's two variables that what we have seen that they can be compromised, and that is really the expectation from a customer and regulator standpoint, is that those elements that you have the reasonable steps of assurance that the incoming data that's coming into the model to be processed to deliver an output, and obviously the model itself. So it has to be a two-faceted approach. One is to evaluate, if you think about, you shift the data that comes into the model to be processed, and whether or not that data could be or is poison. And then secondarily, the model itself. Can somebody alter the model to bring about a not necessary event? So Manoj, if you want to address the second part of the question.
Sure. Thanks, John. So why should I consider AI security above what my existing accelerator program guides me to? So I believe this question is coming from the stealth startup who is registered for any of the accelerator program, where they actually provide the regulatory guidance and services. I have a very simple answer to that, is that you might use this readiness review question to ask yourself that is your traditional cybersecurity things are answering all of these things. And in most likely cases, you can also take these 4 questions back to your accelerator and ask that whether these questions are already answered by them or not. What I want to help you here to understand is that you need to consider the AI security aspect, because There are fundamentally different from the other aspect. And this is what we have seen with this particular slide here, that this novel AI attacks are not only at the intersection of cybersecurity, safety aspects, but they are intersecting with all of these things. So I'm not fully aware about your AI applications, but you need to seriously look at this interplay and make this particular decision that what is reasonably needed. I hope that answers the question.
Right, and so Manoj, to that point is really kind of closing is absolutely is that, and this is where we'll see it, and that's the reason I referenced the Patch Act and the recent FDA guidance still in the draft form, is that what we slowly see is an expectation. So, and again, let's be clear, for many years, the regulators really tried to address whatever new products were coming to the market. Never really addressed the legacy devices. But that is about to change. There is an executive order, at least within the United States. I know there's the National Information Security Initiative out of Europe that will mandate that work, and really is having that the plan of addressing it, and it's really going back to the manufacturer or whomever the organization is. If somebody believes that cryptography equates to AI security, that's fine. They would have to prove it, and it's something that is, there's freedom in how do you deploy it, but then will add the additional steps to prove that cryptography or whatever the method may be will have to be equal or better as to what is expected. But going back to what Manpreet is showing right now, at least with the new guidance with the FDA is putting in, that is the expectation that AI security it's a threshold. It's a question of that will be coming up.
Yeah, and I would like to take the last, the last statement here on this particular fourth bullet point, that if you really read, Xavier, is that there will be a specific implementation differences will arise from different models, which is coming from essentially, let's say, if you are using the computer vision for the radiology, or you are using for the cardiovascular, the ECG signals, or you are, utilizing any other kind of a signal, for an example, textual data. In all of the cases, based upon the different models and then different technologies you use to build these models, and where you deploy is also equally important, because in the previous questions we dealt with that, what if it is deployed in the third party, settings? In that case, you might be considered by that party as a supply chain attack as well. So based upon that different kind of scenarios that we might need to really see that how it is needed. I think that's all on that question. We'll be more than happy to converse on that question, because it's a very interesting question.
Great. And there was a particular comment in the chat box that I saw that FDA should be listening to this presentation. So
yeah, they're aware. They have made it. They've made it very clear that is the case. I think what the interesting part for, at least with the Patch Act, and I do advise folks to have a look at kind of what is in place, is that is to change, and that is in Congress right now. That is to absolutely change the expectation of for medical device manufacturers on the commercialization side, at kind of what is expected, and that will really have a grave impact. And yet, part of it is what the FDA has made it very clear is, unlike the EU and unlike the TGA, in Australia, is they view cybersecurity as part of safety. There's a direct connection of cybersecurity to safety, and because of that, cybersecurity events, whether if they're traditional or novel, they will trigger a safety evaluation. That means complaints, that means field actions, that will mean recalls, if you don't have the substantiated information to prove that event did not have a patient impact. So that is really the kind of the from a product regulatory standpoint, that's kind of the lessons learned if we're going to get back to it based on the Patch Act. That will be the expectation, plus obviously the creation of SBOMs, plus the vulnerability disclosures, plus. So it's just there's a lot. We can talk about for a couple hours in terms of what is at stake here.
Yeah. And John, I just want to highlight here that there are various kinds of assurance things, which is that you are mitigating the threats, you are mitigating the vulnerability, you have done the penetration test, and your security architecture is also reviewed, and all of those aspects. So there are a whole lot of aspects in the very last, the fag end of your development that you will need to, give the documentation as part of security.
Right, and the part is absolutely the part is, let's not forget that for the folks that and again we can I don't know how much time we have, but the idea is that the first threshold will be about that evaluation from a regulator standpoint. The second piece will be about the end customers, because part of it is for any organization that's providing that, let's say under HIPAA, will either be a covered entity or a business associate. But the penalties themselves, if you're to rely on that AI or machine learning deployment, the penalties are the same. So OCR they're not gonna cut you a break because you're an AI enabled organization versus another one. So that's really just the two levels of kind of existential review that will take place.
Great. Thanks, John. We are kind of finishing our time. So there's one more question, maybe a few more, but we will try to take them separately. So there are 2 points that I wanted to convey here. One, we will be sharing this deck with you guys.
Oh, great.
So we will be sending an email. And another thing is your feedback would be really valuable for us to improve going forward. We are planning to do more webinars in this series. So we will be sharing a Mentimeter link in the chat box. And we really hope that you are able to provide your feedback on which we can act on. Thanks a lot once again for joining our webinar, and we hope that it was valuable for you. Thank you, John, and thank you, Manoj.
Thank you, Manpreet. Thanks, Manoj.
Thank you, guys. I hope that we are there to help you and navigate this treacherous path. So don't worry, the path is treacherous, but we are here. Thank you all.
Okay.
God bless. Have a nice day.
We end the meeting.
Bye.